coming in across Scotland, mostly over the north, not too many through the central belt. And the showers also mostly in the morning, tending to ease off by the afternoon. Sunny spells then for quite a few of us during Friday. Temperatures mid to high teens, but quite warm in the south with light winds over the Midlands, South Wales and southern England, widely over 20 degrees Celsius. A fine Friday evening to come as well. Any showers across northern Scotland continuing to fizzle away. That'll lead into, by and large, a fine start to the weekend. Saturday, dry and bright with sunny spells for most, turning cloudier and quite a bit cooler for most of us, though, by Sunday. Goodbye.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very good afternoon and welcome to the Briefing PM, an hour of the latest political news debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey and here's what's coming up over the next hour. Witnessing still the fallout from the Sugré report yesterday. More Conservative MPs calling for the Prime Minister to resign. Many others calling for us to move on. It comes as the Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross made another U-turn on the matter. We'll get the latest from Westminster about whether MPs there are moving on. Also, the Chancellor has finally announced measures to help families across the country combat the cost of living crisis. Is it too late? And what are the measures? We'll be discussing that. And we've all seen the horrendous images of the mass school shooting in Texas. Many people are calling for gun crime to be brought under control in the US. Will the Biden administration take on the gun lobby? We'll be hearing from someone who thinks there should be fewer restrictions on guns. And as always, do get in touch. You can email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. That and so much more between now and 4. But first, at the top of the hour, here's the very latest news with Rihanna.
Thank you, Darren. It's 3:01. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Chancellor's announced a new £15 billion support package to help millions of low-income households with the cost of living crisis. 8 million of the most vulnerable homes will receive a one-off £650 payment, with separate one-off payments of £300 to pensioners and £150 to those on disability benefits. The energy bills discount, due to come in from October, will be doubled from £200 to £400, and the requirement to pay it back will be scrapped. Rishi Sunak also announced a 25% temporary levy on oil and gas firms.
Our energy profits levy will encourage investment, not deter it. It raises around £5 billion of revenue over the next year so that we can help families with the cost of living, and it avoids having to increase our debt burden further. Because there is nothing noble in burdening future generations with ever more debt today, because politicians of the day were too weak to make the tough decisions.
Meanwhile, Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves criticised the government for taking so long to back Labour's plan.
For months, it has been clear that more was necessary to help people bring their bills down. So what took this government so long? Every day that they have refused to act, £53 million more added to Britain's household bills during this cost of living crisis. This government's dither and delay has cost our country dearly.
Two more Conservative MPs say they no longer support the Prime Minister following the Partygate inquiry. More than 15 are now calling for Boris Johnson's resignation. Separately, Acting Commissioner Sir Stephen House has defended the Metropolitan Police's investigation of the Partygate scandal. Speaking before the London Assembly's Police and Crime Committee, he said there were full files of evidence behind each fixed penalty notice.
Work-related is an exception. So the question is not how many people, the question is what were they there for?
People were meant to be more than...
Did they have a reasonable excuse? Could we have had a conviction in court, or would they have heard a reasonable excuse? We were there for a work-related event. That was the thing that our officers have looked at over the last few weeks.
The Texas gunman who killed 19 children and 2 teachers was reportedly inside the primary school for up to an hour. Armed with an assault rifle, the suspect, Salvador Ramos, locked himself in a grade 4 classroom and opened fire. The 18-year-old posted an online message just minutes earlier warning he was going to attack. President Joe Biden says he'll visit Uvalde in the coming days to talk to the victims' families. The Foreign Secretary has accused Russia's President Vladimir Putin of holding the world to ransom over food. The Kremlin has rejected claims it blocked grain exports from Ukraine, saying the West created the situation by imposing sanctions. Speaking in Bosnia earlier, Liz Truss said pressure must be maintained against Moscow.
In my view, it is completely appalling that Putin is trying to hold the world to ransom, and he's essentially weaponising hunger and lack of food amongst the poorest people around the world. We simply cannot allow this to happen. Putin needs to remove the blockade on Ukrainian grain.
A British man's been jailed after admitting to trying to smuggle £160 million worth of cocaine into the UK on a luxury yacht. Andrew Cole from Stockton-on-Tees was aboard the yacht when it was stopped 80 miles off the coast of Plymouth. The UK Border Force and the Australian Federal Police recovered more than 2 tonnes of cocaine from the yacht. The 33-year-old, who's been jailed for 18 years, had links to an international organised crime group. The first cases of monkeypox have been confirmed in Wales and Northern Ireland, bringing the total number across the UK to 80. The Public Health Agency says it's working closely with trusts and GPs to raise awareness of the disease. It says the risk in Northern Ireland is considered low as monkeypox doesn't spread easily and cases are rare. Public Health Wales also says its 1 case is being managed. And the Prime Minister has paid tribute to the Queen ahead of 4 days of celebrations next week to honour the monarch's 70-year reign. Boris Johnson told the House of Commons no world leader has impressed him as much as Her Majesty, who he describes as the nation's rock. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though it's back to Darren with the briefing.
Thank you very much. It is coming up to 7 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Thursday afternoon. We're on TV, online and, of course, on your DAB digital radios. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Let's start with today's big story, and that is that major U-turn by the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, announcing that he will impose a windfall tax. though he's not calling it a windfall tax, on the profits of oil and gas companies to fund measures to help people struggling with the cost of living crisis. The Chancellor was speaking in Parliament. We unveiled various new measures to combat soaring bills. Let's have a look at what Rishi Sunak had to say.
So today, Madam Deputy Speaker, we will provide significant support to the British people. But as I have said, a critical part of how we are dealing with inflation is responsible fiscal policy. What this means in practical terms is that as we support people more, we need to think about the fairest way to fund as much of that cost as possible. The oil and gas sector is making extraordinary profits, not as the result of recent changes to risk-taking or innovation or efficiency, but as the result of surging global commodity prices, driven in part by Russia's war. It is possible to both tax extraordinary profits fairly and incentivise investment. And so, like previous governments, including Conservative ones, we will introduce a temporary targeted energy profits levy, but we have built into the new levy, a new investment allowance similar to the super deduction. That means companies will have a new and significant incentive to reinvest their profits. The new levy will be charged on profits of oil and gas companies at a rate of 25%. It will be temporary, and when oil and gas prices return to historically more normal levels, the levy will be phased out with a sunset clause written into the legislation. So I can announce today we will send directly to around 8 million of the lowest income households a one-off cost of living payment of £650. Support worth over £5 billion to give vulnerable people certainty that we are standing by them at this challenging time. DWP will make the payment in 2 lump sums, the first from July, the second in autumn, with payments from HMRC for those on tax credits following shortly after. There are 2 further groups who will need extra targeted support. Many pensioners are disproportionately impacted by higher energy costs. They can't always increase their incomes through work, and because they spend more time at home and are more vulnerable, they often need to keep the heating on for longer. And we estimate many people who are eligible for pension credit are not currently claiming it, which means there will be many vulnerable pensioners not receiving means-tested benefits. So I can announce today that from the autumn, we will send over 8 million pensioner households who receive the winter fuel payment an extra one-off pensioner cost of living payment of £300. Disabled people also face extra costs in their day-to-day lives, like having energy-intensive equipment around the home or workplace. So, to help the 6 million people who receive non-means-tested disability benefits, we will send them, from September, an extra one-off disability cost of living payment worth £150. While it is impossible for the government to solve every problem, we can and will ease the burden as we help the entire country through the worst of this crisis. So we will provide more support with the rising cost of energy, and that support will be universal. Earlier this year, we announced £9 billion to help with the cost of energy, including a council tax rebate of £150 for tens of millions of households. And we plan to provide all households with £200 off their energy bills from October, with the cost of that repaid over the following 5 years. Since then, the outlook for energy prices has changed. I've heard people's concerns over the impact of these repayments on future bills, so I've decided that those repayments will be cancelled.
There you go, that was the Chancellor speaking a little bit earlier on in Parliament. Joining me in the studio is Myron Johnson. He's the personal finance analyst at Interactive Investor. Very good afternoon to you. What do you make of it all? I mean, quite significant sums of money in the end.
Yes, I mean, it's quite clear that something needs to be done to address this once-in-generation type cost of living crisis. I mean, staying on top of rising prices has become a daily battle for many households. And the Chancellor did actually announce what I think is some decent policies to help, especially those who are the most vulnerable to this cost of living crisis. So we've heard earlier about the £650 payment to around, well, over 8 million low-income households, which will be split in 2 instalments, one in July and the other in autumn.
And this is something that we're not necessarily used to in this country, in the sense that it's going to be paid essentially directly into people's bank accounts.
Indeed, and it's just to help with the cost of living crisis. I suppose a lot has been said about pressures on energy bills, which the boss of Ofgem recently said to MPs that is likely to go up by £800 in autumn, which means that the typical household bills is going to swell to £2,800 per year, which is quite something. But also we know that the price of food, the price of petrol and other things, seemingly all areas of expenditure, is on the rise. So this will help ease that burden.
And in saying that, as you rightly pointed out, this is, on the whole, largely targeted at people on lower incomes, people who are obviously feeling that squeeze the most.
Yes, and to be fair, the Chancellor did announce the £400 grant for all households to help with this heightened energy bill that's only going to get worse come autumn. And initially, actually, so under the initial scheme, it was 200, and households were expected to pay that sum back over 5 years, but that has now been scrapped, and it's now a £400 grant. But I suppose middle earners are still facing a cost of living crisis, obviously not to the same extent as those as lower earners.
But yeah, because the concern is that obviously that there has to be a cut-off line somewhere, and if you're just above that cut-off line, you're not getting the same amount of money as someone who's earning just a little bit less.
Exactly. I suppose this whole package is to get those who are most vulnerable, above, the cut-off line, I suppose, to make sure that they remain financially buoyant in these troubling times. But those who earn decent middle-income earners,
It's going to be a big hit.
It's going to be a big hit, and it's going to result in lifestyle changes for many, unfortunately.
And just in terms of whether this will be enough, because we're expecting inflation to hit double figures. As you say, we don't know where that cap is, but the Ofgem boss is suggesting it's going to go up again quite substantially by around £800 more. I mean, is your sense, is this enough, what we've heard today from the Chancellor? Or do you think he is going to have to possibly come back again later in the year and do even more?
I suppose it all depends on the outlook, on what happens with inflation. Bearing in mind, we still have a war going on in Ukraine, unfortunately, and that's adding to the inflationary pressures back here in the UK. So it really does depend. But for many households, unfortunately, many people will still struggle to, stay financially afloat in this cost of living crisis.
Yeah, it's going to be a very, very difficult year ahead. Myron Schultz, thank you very much indeed for joining us here in the studio. Let's go to Westminster to get the political reaction to all of this. Speak to Tom Harwood, he's our political correspondent, who is in Downing Street for us. Tom, good afternoon to you. Talk us through the politics of all of this. Labour clearly accusing the government today of essentially doing a big U-turn and copying a policy that they've been arguing for months. The government insistent we shouldn't call it a windfall tax.
That's right. I'm not sure how many people are really going to buy the Treasury spin that this is not a windfall tax. It's instead a levy on excess profits, a temporary levy on excess profits. Well, what's the distinction between a temporary levy on excess profits in energy companies versus a windfall tax? I'm not sure many people would draw one. However, Rishi Sunak was at pains today to say in the House of Commons that there are some particular caveats to this proposal, that it does include a sort of super deduction-like mechanism for those firms that do invest in the United Kingdom. So to some extent that does take the sting out of the tail. But of course, this is still a tax that was not predictable, that has been levied on political, that has been levied through political pressure. That's not a great environment for investment in the United Kingdom. What sort of company is going to choose to invest in the United Kingdom if, on a good year when they make a lot of cash, there may well be be a huge tax coming their way that was not predicted, that was not out there in law beforehand, and indeed that is retrospective. It's not a great environment for investment. And indeed the Labour Party's Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves standing up there at the opposition dispatch box in the Commons today saying that the Labour Party has won the intellectual argument, indeed is winning the battle of ideas in the United Kingdom. And frankly, when it comes to the issue of the windfall tax, it's hard to see differently. It seems like the Labour Party has won this battle of ideas. It wasn't so long ago that you'd see Conservative ministers taking to the airwaves, talking to the newspapers, saying that this was a bad idea, that they shouldn't be raising the tax burden on Britain yet higher still, because that is what has happened. Britain has today become a higher tax country. The overall tax burden, which was already at a 70-year high, has this year risen further still. And from a government that has started to talk about cutting people's taxes, it is now raising taxes, albeit on a one-off basis for energy companies. The question is, to what extent will that super deduction actually allow the investment to still take place that would have taken place were this tax not implemented? Of course, we know that the country needs to get to net zero by 2050. That is in the statute books. That is UK law that we must do that, and that requires a hell of a lot of investment into green technology. Now, energy companies were one big avenue to do that, and to what extent will the details of this super deduction still allow for that investment, or will the costs then fall on ordinary Britons to pick up the tab for net zero rather than the energy companies? That is what will need to be poured over as the detail of this policy comes forward. But ultimately, the politics of this were clear. The argument had indeed been won in the opinion polls by the Labour Party. Overwhelmingly, the people of Britain thought that a windfall tax would be a good idea. I suppose it is that short-termism that won out in the end, and indeed the clamouring need that was seen by so many people for help with energy bills, which are due to rise yet further when that energy price cap is reassessed in the autumn. It's certainly a tricky situation, an unenviable situation for any Treasury.
Indeed it is, but we know that this announcement was at least timed because of what happened yesterday. Let's briefly talk about that, Tom. A couple of more Conservative MPs calling for the Prime Minister to go in the wake of the Sue Gray report, but no sense of any momentum of significant moves against Boris Johnson.
No, it does seem like the biggest moment of danger in the whole Partygate saga was maybe a month or two ago. Potentially, what we are seeing now is the final flare of this situation. Indeed, there is one more moment of danger, however, in this long and protracted investigation. Of course, we've had the Met Police investigation conclude. We've had the Sue Gray investigation conclude, but there is still the Privileges Committee investigation. Now, this isn't an investigation into parties per se, but more an investigation into the mind of the Prime Minister. Did he knowingly mislead Parliament when he said that no rules were broken, when he said that he was assured no rules were broken, and when he said he did not believe he broke any rules himself? Well, of course, it's whether he genuinely believed that, not the fact of it. It's whether he knowingly misled Parliament. Of course, he corrected the record at the dispatch box this week, but it is for the Privileges Committee to determine whether or not he knew that he was telling something that was not true to the Commons back in December or not.
Tom, as always, thank you very much indeed. Tom Harwood there joining us from Downing Street. Thank you, Tom. OK, we'll take a quick break here on GB News. By the way, do get in touch, GBViews at gbnews.uk, particularly if you think the government has done enough on the cost of living or need to do more. But coming up after the break, we're going to be discussing the Prime Minister's future as the Conservative Party today unveiled their strategy for the next general election. What have they been talking about? We'll be finding out in just a couple of minutes.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Very welcome back to GB News. Now, whilst the Sir report has been dominating the headlines, Conservative HQ has been holding its first Target Seats conference in Leicestershire. MPs in marginal seats have been meeting with the Tory chair, Oliver Dowden, to discuss the Target Seats programme known as the 80-20 strategy. Despite the mood in Westminster, CTHQ is clearly working up a strategy for the next general election. But can it hold on to lots of those seats, particularly in the Red Wall? Join me now is Henry Murison. He is from the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. Henry, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News. Do you get a sense, at least, that it is still those Red Wall seats in the north of England that are core to the Conservatives' next general election campaign?
I think, electorally speaking, you've got a lot of investment now into those places, and I think probably more than just the Prime Minister's majority. I think it's also probably pretty core to Boris Johnson's own personal brand that he can hold on to those voters who chose him last time from traditionally working class areas, places like Blyth in the North East, but also many parts of the Midlands as well, parts of the North West, and sort of outer reaches of kind of Greater Manchester up in Cumbria, seats like Barrow, where often the Tories have not necessarily been that competitive, alongside those more traditional marginals, because obviously the north of England also has seats like where I'm sitting in the Bradford district, Keighley, Shipley, that are more traditional marginals that have always changed hand between elections. So it's a combination, I think, of the Red Wall and of the traditional marginals. And what's interesting, I think, Darren, in terms of what's happening electorally, is that the Brexit coalition isn't staying together that easily for the Prime Minister. And one of the key issues about Partygate, whatever the moral rights and wrongs that have been debated on your show and many others, the sort of psychological sort of impact can't be underestimated. The council results, particularly up in Cumberland, were terrible for the Conservative Party. I mean, Labour romped home in what was proper Red Wall territory, and that doesn't bode well for the Prime Minister and for the wider Conservative Party. And the real question is, to what extent has Partygate particularly hit home with traditional working class voters for whom values of trust and probity are particularly important, and the things they hated about Jeremy Corbyn, bluntly, that he couldn't be trusted, that he was a bit shifty, that he isn't the sort of person they'd want to go for a pint with. Has the Prime Minister undermined the Heineken elements of his personality in the minds of those voters? And I think those of us who observe politics, as you and I have, from our different positions for many years now, can't call it too early, probably.
Indeed, but at the same time, Henry, what do you think the Conservative Party? I think we can still hear him, even if you have froze, Henry. I was just saying, well, what do the Conservative Party need to do, though, in the next couple of years in your part of the world to try and retain those voters? We have lost him. We have lost him. We'll try and go back to Henry a little later on in the programme. The gremlins always playing up. Let's turn to you, the voters. What do you make of all of this? Where's the national mood on politics at the moment, particularly following that Sue Gray report? Let's go live to Paul Hawkins. He's our national reporter and he's in Boris Johnson's constituency of Uxbridge. Paul?
Yeah, hi Darren. Just interestingly, talking to your contributor there about the Sue Gray effect on the electorate. I was here in Uxbridge yesterday afternoon talking to people about the Sue Gray report. It definitely has cut through and some people are tired of talking about it. But even those people that have reached Partygate fatigue, it has affected their relationship with the Prime Minister. The question is, as you were just talking about there, is that effect going to continue until the next general election, which is 2 years away? And if they say a week's a long time in politics, then what the hell is 2 years? I mean, that's like a lifetime, it seems. But yeah, we've been here in Boris Johnson's constituency today talking about those measures that the Chancellor has outlined. We spoke to lots of people earlier, asked them how they felt about the Chancellor making that announcement, an extra 400 quid in their pocket, or at least that's the discount he's going to give to energy bills when he makes the announcement. This is what they told us earlier.
It's not going to be enough, but it will help. But the thing is now, with the price energy cap, it's going until, I don't know, maybe 2,800 per year.
That's right, that's right.
When we compare the situation here with the other European countries like Germany, I have a colleague in Germany, they said that they do a lot of things there to help people. Here, we had a good action who concerned everyone, to help everyone to fight this crisis, because it's a really crisis, and I think anyone could feel that.
I mean, to be honest, we're not living on the breadline, but obviously there's people that it's going to affect. And when you hear that people are having to choose between food and utilities, it's, you know, I suppose we're lucky that we're, at the moment, we're okay, but, you know, it's the people that aren't going to be okay.
Everything's going up. Like, what was it? Dog food went up from 79p to £1.10 the other day, and it's like these increases are a bit too much, especially compared to what people think you can live off. You know what I mean? Like, because like I'm saying, universal credit's like, this is how much we're giving you to live off for a month. Now it's like, I'd spend all of that on just travelling in and out of London every day. Do you know what I mean? And food, and like, especially being homeless, it's not like I can buy food cheap and store it in a refrigerator and keep it. You know, like if.
So that is what people have been telling us earlier, and some also making the point that, yeah, OK, this package is more than we were expecting earlier this morning, but it's a package, it's not a long-term strategy, and that if the cost of living crisis is going to continue, we certainly know it's going to continue into next year, then what's the Chancellor's plans long-term, or is he just going to keep coming back to the Commons and giving out these packages?
Paul, thank you very much indeed. Paul Hawkins there joining us from Uxbridge. Thank you, Paul, in West London. Lots of you getting in touch, GBViews at gbnews.uk. Harry says, once again, the pensioners have been screwed. First the triple lock, now the cost of living out of hand. Rishi should remember there are 4 million of us, and we won't forget coming the election. Leslie says, Darren, let's be honest, Labour would still say it's not enough if the government give everyone £100,000. It's just jealousy from Labour. Chris says, I'm going to sue the government for its comparative negligence towards me in the 70s when he experienced a far worse cost of living. Apart from the very poor, I'm staggered at how modern Britain are so declined to dig deep, break into savings, tighten its belt and constantly expect the government to bail them out. And Kathleen says the main problem for the Prime Minister is that he's like the boy who cried wolf. Even if he tells the truth, no one believes him. GB Views at gbnews.uk. OK, we're going to pause there. Coming up in a couple of minutes, we're going to talk about gun crime in America following that awful shooting in Texas. Frankly, we'll be debating whether America needs to get its act together on guns. You'll not want to miss that. But first, let's bring you up to date with the news headlines just after 3:30.
Thank you, Darren. It's 3:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has announced a £5 billion tax on oil and gas companies to help families struggling through the cost of living crisis. Every household will receive a £400 discount off their energy bills, which won't need to be repaid. The lowest income earners will be given £650 in 2 lump sums in July and in the autumn. Pensioners will receive a one-off payment of £300, and in September, 6 million people on disability benefits will receive a payment of £150.
Supporting people with the cost of living is only one part of our plan for a stronger economy. A plan that is creating more jobs, cutting taxes on working people, reducing our borrowing and debt, driving businesses to invest and innovate more, unleashing a skills revolution, seizing the benefits of Brexit and levelling up growth in all parts of the United Kingdom. The British people can trust this government because we have a plan for a stronger economy, and I commend it to this House.
Meanwhile, Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves criticised the government for taking so long to back Labour's plan.
For months, it has been clear that more was necessary to help people bring their bills down. So what took this government so long? Every day that they have refused to act, £53 million more added to Britain's household bills during this cost of living crisis. This government's dither and delay has cost our country dearly.
And in the last few minutes, actor Kevin Spacey has been charged with 4 counts of sexual assault against 3 men. The Crown Prosecution Service says the charges follow a review of the evidence gathered by the Metropolitan Police in its investigation. The Foreign Secretary has accused Russia's President Vladimir Putin of holding the world to ransom over food. The Kremlin has rejected claims it blocked grain exports from Ukraine, saying the West created the situation by imposing sanctions. Liz Truss says pressure must be maintained against Moscow. The first cases of monkeypox have been confirmed in Wales and Northern Ireland, with a further 2 cases found in Scotland. Earlier today, it was believed the total number of cases in the UK was at 79. The Public Health Agency says it's working closely with trusts and GPs to raise awareness of the disease. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.249 to the dollar. It's 1.182 to the euro. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,470.95 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very good afternoon. Welcome back to the programme. It is 23 minutes to 4 o'clock on this Thursday afternoon. You're watching us on TV, online, and indeed on your DAB digital radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Now, we touched on it a little earlier, didn't we? Of course, Rishi Sunak announcing that he's going to impose a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies to fund measures to help people struggling with the cost of living crisis. The Chancellor was speaking in Parliament, where he unveiled those new measures. You heard it in the news, but it's an extra 650 quid for people on the lowest income households, but 400 quid for everyone in the autumn, and an extra £300 for pensioners, and one-off disability cost of living payment of £150. Well, joining me now in the studio is Christina. I'm going to let Christina pronounce her own surname. How do you pronounce it, Christina?
Rabatsaite.
Rabatsaite. What a great surname. Founder and CEO of Papaya, who joins us. Christina, thank you. First of all, there's been an awful lot of criticism, hasn't there, from some about this so-called windfall tax, that it's going to nobble investment by the likes of BP and Shell. Do you think that was ever the case?
So I guess it depends what side of the market you look at. So I think if you were going to put a windfall tax on renewables or nuclear, for sure. I think creating uncertainty in an already quite uncertain market, because let's not forget there is no subsidies to support these projects, and then knocking them down even further would certainly delay or completely sort of banish the...
But in saying that, I mean, the arguments being made, from what I understood, it was that those companies and those supporters of those companies were suggesting that in order to get to net zero by 2050, these BP and Shell and others needed to invest either in renewable energy or indeed in making their current energy supplies more efficient.
Yes, exactly. So these companies, like Shell and BP, they do use their oil money to build renewables in our country and obviously across the world. So it's not going to help to actually reach the goals that we set for ourselves if we keep pushing them down. But obviously there's a lot to think about right now. There's people that cannot afford their bills right now. So what are the best parts within the energy market that we can take a bit of money off? And yes, they've made so much profit, BP, Shell, and it could be shared to support the lowest earners in the country. But we need to be so careful, because if we overdo it, one, inflation's going to be affected even further, and also investment on renewables can genuinely be jeopardised.
Well, what would you say to people, though, who argue, frankly, we've got shale gas in this country, which we're not exploiting. We could be doing more about the North Sea oil and gas situation. That if we want to become a bit more energy independent, not having to rely on everyone else, we should be a bit more domestic. And, frankly, if that means a bit of more greenhouse gas, well, so be it, that this is more important.
I think Ukraine invasion and all the other things that happened in the last year really put the energy security in perspective. So yes, it's not just the net zero we need to worry about. We need to make sure that the lights are on in the country and people can afford to heat their homes. Sorry, I was going to...
It's all right. No,
sorry, I forgot my line.
I think you're making a case about why we should potentially look at North Sea oil.
Yes, that was it. Sorry, I forgot your question while I was... So the problem with the North Sea oil is that we're talking about an international market. So 80% of that oil will be traded internationally, or maybe more, depending who pays more, where is it going to go. So really, it's not going to help internal bills or internal energy security as much as we really think. It's talking about like 2% increase if we sort of deliver what we set to deliver. So really, I think there's much more to concentrate on than just the oil. I think renewables, battery storage, hydrogen, this is what needs to be invested in, and hopefully, you know, if the government gives that security and stability in the policies, which is what we need, you know, entrepreneurs in the UK now, they learn to live without subsidies, they learn to live without the support, but you can't make their lives even harder and make them live with additional taxes. So I think that's what's going to be an immediate bill reduction and sort of guarantee a brighter, lower bill future and for all of us.
Well, we hope that's the case. We hope the case.
Yeah.
Christina, thank you very much indeed for joining us here in the studio. Thank you. OK, let's move on to America, because it's been the other big story, of course, rather tragically this week. President Joe Biden has called for tougher gun controls and asked why the US is willing to live with this carnage, he put it, after a teenage gunman murdered at least 19 children and 2 adults in the country's deadliest school shooting in nearly a decade. The suspect has been identified as Salvador Ramos. He's 18, was charged into the Robb Elementary School in Texas. It's about 80 miles west of San Antonio. Those are the kids that you can see on your screen, 11:30 a.m. on Tuesday, shortly after shooting his grandmother, who survived. This week it comes as new stats reveal that 17,000 people died in the United States because they've been directly affected by guns, frankly. Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Dr. Sebastian Corker. He's the former strategic advisor to Donald Trump. Sebastian, thank you very much indeed. Here we go again, another school shooting. There's been many this year already so far. What were your feelings when you hear... you know, this yet again, I suppose?
Well, sadly, as soon as it occurred, I tweeted out, I don't usually do predictions because nobody's kept to their predictions, but I predicted, sadly, what came to pass, which is that we will find out that this individual had a track record. He was disturbed, and there were signs that should have been picked up, but they weren't for various reasons of political correctness, or school administrators weren't prepared to take the requisite action, just as happened at the Parkland shooting with that young man who had 26 engagements with law enforcement before he killed his fellow students. This individual had a history of self-harm. He was deemed to be unusual, peculiar by his colleagues. And then on social media, on Facebook, he said, I'm going to go and shoot up this school. So again, a massive failure for the system. Guns don't shoot people, other people shoot people. And the system failed once again to find this individual and deal with him psychiatrically or through the law enforcement system. And it is a horrific tragedy as a result.
No doubt it's a horrific tragedy, but isn't the system failing in the sense that, you know, this is an 18-year-old kid who can't go out and buy a beer, but he can go out and buy 2 AR-15s that clearly can kill. Isn't that the failure system, that this guy's allowed, this 18-year-old is allowed to buy such deadly weapons?
Not at all. In Waukesha recently, a black extremist ran down 60 people, including dozens of grannies, and killed a 6-year-old boy with his car. So don't concentrate on the inanimate object. If you're a psychopath, you will kill people with whatever you want to kill people with, whether it is an SUV or whether it's a gun, a brick, or a knife. The fact isn't the weapon. The fact is the individual who has the intent to kill his fellow man, or in this case, children. So no, this Second Amendment right we have is non-negotiable. We are an independent nation because of our access to guns. That's why it is the Second Amendment to our Constitution in the Bill of Rights. So no, there are more than 300 guns in America for very good reason, because we are the final ultimate arbiter of our freedom. We are not subjects of a crown. We are citizens. So don't blame mental illness on one of our inalienable rights to defend ourselves.
Well, then Natalie's question, what's wrong with Americans? Are you guys just a bit mad? I mean, I don't get it, because you're right, there's lots of other countries that got lots of other guns, but we don't see mass shootings, particularly in schools, on anywhere the same level. What's so wrong with American society?
That's a much, much deeper question that we could discuss for at least an hour here on your show. I think the left's assault on faith, the left's assault on manhood, on families, on nuclear families, on the role of positive male role models for young men. And on top of that, the 1973 Supreme Court decision, which was a catastrophe that said you cannot institutionalize somebody with psychiatric problems beyond 72 hours unless they are actually physically harming themselves, means the streets of New York, of Baltimore, even here in Washington, D.C., are full of people who should be in psych wards, who are now homeless because they've been kicked onto the streets because that's the sensitive thing to do. And it's the same with young men. You see a track record again and again and again of young, disturbed individuals who should be in a home, who should be institutionalized. Instead, they're hopped up on drugs, on Ritalin and other prescription drugs, and they're just allowed to live in the community until they find a way to exercise their psychosis. So
no, but the problem with that, though, Sebastian, is that many of the ills that you talk about there, I mean, they are applicable in much of Western Europe. You know, some of the difficulties that young people face, or indeed, you know, the mental difficulties some people face, you know, that's universal. I wouldn't suggest that is a distinctly American problem, the breakdown.
But you don't have a Supreme Court decision like we do.
No, I know, but that's perfectly fine. That's what I'm trying to work out. But fundamentally, you put forward a narrative here. So my narrative is there is either two things here. Either Americans are exceptional in their cruelness to a degree, or their inability to deal with some of the things that you've talked about. I'm not entirely sure that's the case. The other explanation is that people far too easily, I'm not talking about the Second Amendment here, far too easily have access to guns. There's not been a gun death in this city that I'm sat in London since November of last year. I mean, I try to think the number of people who've died. And that, frankly, is down to, Sebastian, that must be down to access to guns, the ease with which people can access guns, surely.
How many knife deaths in London in the last year?
Still not anywhere on the same level that you'd see in a comparable city like New York in the United States.
You can't answer, right? So it's not the inanimate object, okay? It's the intent. And also, I've been very, very clear here. We have no way to stop psychotic individuals from harming other people for more than 72 hours. That's not. I grew up in England. I was born in West London. That's not the case. You have mental institutions where if somebody is threatening their family members or themselves, they can be institutionalized for the safety of the UK. That is not the case in America since 1973, and a politically correct liberal decision out of the Supreme Court that says, no, you can't do that. That's against the human rights of that individual. Well, that's how you get an 18-year-old person killing 18 children in a school, because they knew this was a self-harming. This is an individual who was cutting his face, okay? That normal people don't cut their face and then brag about going to shoot their grandmother. They should have been in a home. That's what should have happened, and it didn't happen, and that's why we have grieving families in Uvalde today.
Okay, Sebastian, just for clarity's sake, there were essentially, in terms of knife crime, it's pretty comparable. 2019, there were 76 homicides attributed to knife in New York, exactly the same number as London. That is not the same when it comes to gun deaths. Unfortunately, in those two incidents, and New York has got actually more gun controls than most of the United States.
Handguns are banned in New York. Just a little fact for you.
Okay, Sebastian, thank you as always. Thank you. Okay, let's talk about domestic issues. Finally, on the end of the programme, let's talk about passports, because apparently everyone's going to get their passport within 4 to 6 weeks. That's according to the Prime Minister yesterday, though there is a massive backlog. It's caused anger, unsurprisingly, amongst the travel industry, many suggesting that people are waiting up to 10 weeks or more. Let's speak to Simon Calder, who joined us down the line, travel editor of The Independent, of course. Simon, what did you make of what the Prime Minister had to say yesterday in the Commons? He was suggesting it's all sorted, we should calm down.
Yes, I was astonished, as everybody was, with what he said. This was a little notice, because there was one or two other things going on, as you might have realised in the Commons in Prime Minister's question time yesterday about the cost of living crisis, etc. But he was asked by Keir Starmer, what are you going to do about the passports? And effectively, he said, we've already fixed it. We've massively accelerated things. And, quote, everybody is now getting their passport within 4 to 6 weeks. I went, what? And so did lots of other people, because it's nothing like that at the moment. Certainly, if you apply online and you are going to upload your photo and it's okay, and there's no problem with your particular passport application, then the chances are you're going to get it in 2 or 3 weeks, which is great. But there's an awful lot of people waiting an awful lot longer. I went onto the Home Office and asked them, what on earth was he talking about? And what they said was that over 90% of people are getting their passports within the 6 weeks. So when he said everybody, what he meant was over 90%. And certainly my figures show that actually 1 in 70 people is waiting over 10 weeks for their passport renewal. So you might find it difficult to believe, but I think this was the case of the Prime Minister being sadly mistaken in what he told the Commons.
That's a very polite way of putting it, Simon. Let's talk about EasyJet cancelling lots of flights this afternoon. An IT failure. They're having a pretty torrid time, as are the passengers, it must be said.
Yeah, and now look, let me give you the background to this. EasyJet already is hugely under-resourced for the operations it wants to conduct from, particularly from London Gatwick, its biggest base. So, for example, this morning we had about 15, 20 early cancellations, mainly to Italy, as it happens. But then this afternoon, from about 1 o'clock, there's been a systems failure at EasyJet. The airline apologises, of course, but they have cancelled 200 flights as a result. And not just, a flight between, let's say, Liverpool and Belfast, although that's one of the fallers. That's annoying, but there are other ways of getting past that. From Luton to Bodrum, to Rhodes in Greece, to Las Palmas, to Tenerife in the Canaries. These are really long flights. You've got getting on for 200 people in Luton to each of those destinations, desperate to get on their holidays. At the other end, you've got all these people who've had lovely holidays wanting to come back. EasyJet originally said, this isn't our fault, you're not getting any compensation to people. They have since, in the past few minutes, told me that was a mistake, and everybody is due compensation. Longer flights, that's £350, shorter flights, 220. But crucially, they've got to get you to your destination. And that involves, if necessary, buying a ticket on a different airline for you. And of course, while you're waiting to get to your destination, they have to pay for your meals and, if necessary, find you and pay for accommodation. Now, experience shows that when airlines have large-scale meltdowns, and British Airways has had a good few of those, then you are not going to get necessarily the airline booking your flight, booking your hotel for you. So in that case, you have to pay for it yourself if your credit card will stand the strain, and then claim it back.
OK, well, as someone who's hopefully flying with EasyJet to Italy next week, I hope they do sort it all out. Simon, thank you very much. Simon called it there. Colin Frazier is in the studio. He's on air in 5 minutes' time. Colin, what's coming up on the programme?
Flying, you think if Seb Gorka doesn't have you done for, that is. We'll park that, shall we? Crikey. Good telly. Good telly. Fascinating discussion. Sensitively handled.
Well, it's this thing about, OK, we get the Second Amendment, but it's the ease with which it's
I know, we had the same conversation yesterday. How is it possible for somebody, as you say, who can't buy liquor but can buy a rifle that can discharge bullets at such a rate of knots? We'll park that. It's a sensitive topic, but I thought you did really well. I want to get into the fact that we've got a windfall tax that's going to yield £5 billion. Lots of discussion about that. We've also got £5 billion that's gone in fraud on universal credit. How much chat's there been about that?
OK.
Not very much. Not very much.
Just a couple of minutes from 4 o'clock. Colin, thank you. That's it from me for today. Arlene, of course, here at 3 tomorrow. I'll see you on Monday. Have a nice weekend. We'll leave you with the weather this afternoon. Stay tuned for Colin.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. Three-way split today. Sunshine and showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland, a dull and damp zone in central areas, and then largely dry and bright in the south thanks to an area of high pressure. Low pressure is dominating further north, and it's in these central areas where we've got the dull, damp weather from these weather fronts bringing cloud and rain for much of the afternoon over parts of northern England, north and mid Wales, and into the Midlands at times. The far north of England may brighten up. Some fine weather for Northern Ireland, not too many showers here. Sunny spells across Scotland, but also quite a few showers drifting in at times on a brisk wind. Breezy in the far south, but mostly dry and bright at times here. Some sunny spells, particularly in the southeast, could see highs of 21 or 22. It feels a lot cooler than that, though, with the cloud and rain over northern England. That will sink away this evening. Bit of rain for a time over the Midlands, South Wales, and staying quite dank and misty overnight in southwest England. We'll keep some showers going in northern and western Scotland, but otherwise a dry night and with clear skies, turning quite chilly, especially in this central zone, parts of the Midlands, East Wales, well down into single figures, certainly rural areas, not too far off freezing actually to start Friday, but for most Friday's going to be a fine, bright day, starting cloudy over the Channel Isles. There will still be showers coming in across Scotland, mostly over the north, not too many through the central belt, and the showers also mostly in the morning, tending to ease off by the afternoon. Sunny spells then for quite a few of us during Friday. Temperatures mid to high teens, but quite warm in the south with light winds over the Midlands, South Wales and southern England, widely over 20 degrees Celsius. A fine Friday evening to come as well. Only showers across northern Scotland continuing to fizzle away. That'll lead into, by and large, a fine start to the weekend. Saturday, dry and bright with sunny spells for most, turning cloudier and quite a bit cooler for most of us, though, by Sunday. Goodbye.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's